In the summer of 1816, people looked up at the midday sky and saw stars. Across Europe and North America, crops failed, snow fell in June, and thousands starved, while in a dark villa above Lake Geneva, a young woman began to imagine a monster made of dead flesh and stolen lightning. The story begins a year earlier, in April 1815, on a remote Indonesian island most Europeans had never heard of. There, Mount Tambora erupted with a force 4 times greater than Krakatoa, the largest volcanic explosion in recorded human history. Tambora didn't just blow off its top, it erased it. The mountain collapsed into itself, leaving a vast caldera, 6 kilometers wide, an open wound in the earth that you can still see today from above. Over the course of several days, Tambora hurled an estimated 150 cubic kilometers of rock, ash, and gas into the atmosphere. The plume punched into the stratosphere, where fine particles of sulfuric acid spread around the globe, forming a thin veil that would dim the sun for years. On local maps, the devastation looked almost abstract, just red zones and shaded rings of ashfall radiating from a dot called Tambora. But those red patches meant villages buried, fields suffocated, and tens of thousands of lives erased beneath a gray rain of stone and dust. Winds carried those aerosols westward, then around the world, invisible yet relentless. By the winter of 1815, sunsets in Europe and North America glowed an unnatural blood red, beautiful omens of a climate disaster no one yet understood. In 1816, the world's climate lurched off balance. Temperatures plunged by as much as 3 degrees Celsius in parts of Europe and North America. A tiny number on paper, but enough to turn spring into winter and summer into a season of hunger. In Switzerland, where our writers would soon gather, grain rotted in the fields and pastures turned to mud. By 1817, scenes of desperate families grazing alongside their cattle, humans and animals, reduced to the same struggle for survival, were burned into collective memory. All across Central Europe, stone and plaster recorded what the sky had done. Inscriptions carved into walls and markers spoke of the year of hunger and the summer without sun, memorials to a season when the weather itself seemed cursed. The chain is clear now, though no one in 1816 could see it. An eruption in Indonesia, a veil in the stratosphere, failed harvests in Europe. And in the middle of this global catastrophe, a handful of young writers, chasing romance and scandal, headed for a lake in Switzerland, just in time to be trapped by the cold. In May 1816, the shores of Lake Geneva should have been idyllic. Green slopes, calm water, clear alpine skies. Instead, thick clouds brooded over the lake, and a chill wind skated across the surface, as if winter had refused to leave. On a hillside above the water stood Villa Diodati, a handsome house that would become a crucible of modern horror. Its most notorious guest was Lord Byron, famous, exiled, and delighting in the scandal he dragged with him wherever he went. With Byron came his young physician, John Polidori, ambitious and a little resentful of his brilliant, difficult employer. Nearby, in a smaller lodging, were Mary Godwin, soon to be Mary Shelley, her lover, Percy Shelley, and Mary's stepsister, Claire Claremont, all in their late teens and early 20s, chasing love, liberty, and literature. They had come for sunlit boat rides, alpine hikes, and glittering evenings by the lake. What they got instead were storms, day after day of cold rain, low clouds, and sudden tempests that made even short walks along the shore feel ominous. Contemporary accounts describe thunder growling over the lake and lightning clawing across black skies in what should have been high summer. The year without a summer had turned Villa Diodati into an island of candlelight in a sea of unnatural darkness. Trapped indoors, the group turned to talk, books, and increasingly morbid entertainment. They read German ghost stories, discussed galvanism, the new science of jolting dead tissue with electricity, and speculated, half-jokingly, whether life itself was just a force that might be switched on and off. One night, Byron proposed a game. Each of them would write a ghost story. It was a way to pass the time, to prove their talent, and to wrestle creatively with the nightmare world they saw outside the window. For Mary, the challenge became an obsession. She later wrote of lying awake, eyes closed, seeing in her mind's eye a pale student of unhallowed arts kneeling beside the thing he had put together, and of that thing's heart beginning to beat. Outside, the world really did feel like something had gone wrong with creation. Frost killed crops in June. Lakeside villages saw snow in the height of summer, and the sun itself appeared dim and bloody through the haze. Just the sort of apocalyptic backdrop to make a story about man usurping nature's power feel plausible. In that atmosphere, Mary began to write what she called her waking dream, the tale of Victor Frankenstein and his creature. The first edition, published in 1818, bore the subtitle The Modern Prometheus, a warning that in trying to steal divine fire, humans might unleash something they cannot control. The imagery that later editions attached to Frankenstein, dark laboratories, stitched together bodies, lightning-struck awakenings, echoed the fears and fascinations of that strange, cold summer in a world where the sky itself had turned hostile. The idea that nature could strike back through science gone wrong felt less like fantasy and more like prophecy. Byron, for his part, dashed off a fragment about a mysterious aristocrat who seemed strangely untouched by illness and death. Polidori seized on that idea, reshaped it, and in 1819 published The Vampire, featuring Lord Ruthven, a charming, predatory nobleman who feeds on society while feeding on blood. This was the birth of the modern vampire, not a peasant corpse from village folklore, but an immortal, seductive figure moving through elite society. From Polidori's Lord Ruthven, you can draw a straight line to Dracula, to countless novels and films, all tracing their ancestry back to those stormy nights at Lake Geneva. Meanwhile, the real world continued to reel from Tambora's shadow. Food riots broke out, migrants crossed oceans in search of better weather, and some historians argue that the social unrest of these years helped drive political change across continents. None of that was visible from the windows of Villa Diodati, but the same volcanic veil that dimmed the sun over starving villages also darkened the rooms where Percy Shelley and John Polidori wrote, giving their imaginations a world already half-tilted into nightmare. Today, we remember Frankenstein and the modern vampire as cornerstones of horror and science fiction, but behind them stands a volcano in Indonesia, a year without a summer, and a reminder that the stories we tell are often aftershocks of forces far beyond our control. The next time you see a mad scientist spark life into a creature or a vampire glide through the night, remember the ash in the stratosphere and the snow that fell in June. In 1816, the planet itself told a ghost story, and Percy Shelley, Byron, and Polidori were simply the ones who wrote it down.